Good day, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It is truly an honor and a privilege to welcome all of you to the second international conference, Terrorism, State and Non-State Sponsored Versions. Today, we gather here to explore, discuss, and exchange ideas on state and non-state sponsored versions. This conference is organized by the Terror Spring Foundation. The Terror Spring Foundation, established by survivors and victims of terrorism with the help of a dedicated team, aims to counter sectarianism, terrorism, and warmongering. It focuses on exposing the true nature of the Mujahideen-e-Khaq, MEK, MKO, using historical evidence. The foundation has published 9 bulletins on key topics, including MEK's activities, financial corruption, and sectarianism, providing unique and enlightening perspectives. Additionally, it organizes national and international conferences to combat terrorism and invites collaboration from scholars, researchers, and institutions worldwide to advance its mission. To view the presented achievements and contact with us, please visit our website. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Together, let's make state and non-state sponsored versions a truly remarkable experience. Let's begin.
This is the MEK.
Mullahs must get more sanctions!
Also known as the People's Mujahideen of Iran. Banned from Iran and based in Albania, they hold rallies like this across the Western world, calling for the overthrow of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. High-profile U.S. politicians often take part and are reportedly paid thousands of dollars for their time.
I think the regime in Tehran is very fragile. I think there's enormous domestic opposition to it.
Iran should be isolated until Iran changes.
The message is simple. It's time for regime change in Iran, and the MEK is the best option to move forward. But is it? We decided to ask around. We spoke to Hassan Hirani, a former MEK member, Mahjoub Zuhairi, a professor of Iranian and Gulf Studies at Qatar University, and Barbara Slavin, director of Future of Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council, an American think tank.
This group is not fit to replace the Iranian government. It's a cult around a disappeared, possibly dead leader, Masoud Rajavi, and his widow, Mariam Rajavi. It brainwashes people. It forces them to give up their earthly goods, to divorce their spouses, to renounce their children, and it keeps them in camps against their will.
The group's origins date back to the time of the Shah, when Iran was a U.S. ally. They started in the 1960s as a group of middle-class university students. They helped topple the Shah during the 1979 Iranian Revolution, calling themselves the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, or the Holy Warriors of the People.
They were one of the most violent and militant groups in Iran in the 1970s. But then they lost out in the power struggle that occurred during and after the revolution. They committed some spectacular terrorist attacks. They blew up parliament. They killed a number of senior Iranian officials, and they had to flee the country. They wound up in Iraq, where they got the patronage of Saddam Hussein.
The MEK was listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department in 1997. But after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, MEK leaders started lobbying the U.S. to reverse that designation. Here's an advertisement they ran on U.S. television in 2012.
MEK is Iran's democratic opposition, working for a nuclear-free Iran founded on human rights.
They got their way later that year and have been on a campaign for legitimacy ever since. The MEK's new image seems to be gaining traction in the U.S. But what about where it really counts? In Iran.
The organization is forgotten in the opinion society of the Iranian people.
After 40 years now of the Islamic Republic, the MK has failed to fill the gaps politically in Iran.
What people want is a real democracy, not a cult, and certainly not a Marxist Islamist cult masquerading as a democratic group.
They don't have any valid supporter in Iran, and they have just one way, the war between United States and Iran.
So politically, I don't think so. They are able to fill the gap in Iran, even if the regime falls today.
But they are getting support. The rallies, the travel, all that costs money. So who is funding the MEK?
On the issue of sponsorship, we have lack of information, accurate information, but there is a sort of speculation.
I think it's probably the Saudis and the Emiratis that are funding the MEK as a way to antagonize Iran and to pay it back for Iran's support for Houthis in Yemen, for Shia dissidents in Saudi Arabia's eastern province.
Now, the main supporter of the organization is the Arab Saudi.
The recent conference for MK, Turki Faisal, the former director of intelligence, did actually attend and deliver a speech there.
For the record, the MEK has always denied it's financed by Saudi Arabia. But it gets funding from somewhere, enough to pay those high-profile US politicians we mentioned earlier.
There are people in the Trump administration very high up who have taken tens of thousands of dollars from the MEK. I'm thinking of John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, who has been one of their most important speakers at so-called conferences or rallies that they hold. John Bolton certainly has taken a lot of money from them and is in effect a kind of lobbyist for them. So has Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's personal lawyer.
We reached out to the MEK for comment, but didn't hear back.
Thank you for watching. Now, let's move on to the next part of our program, where I am honored to introduce our first respected guest, Mr. Alessandro Finetti, a documentary maker and geopolitical analyst from Italy. He has kindly prepared a special video message to share his thoughts and insights with us. Let's take a moment to watch his presentation together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important conference on terrorism. My speech is entitled Geopolitical State Terrorism: The Archetypal Chile as a Global Warming to the Peoples of the World. Often, in the history of geopolitics and international relations, terrorism has been used to achieve tactical and/or strategic objectives by various actors in the global context. It has been, is, and certainly will be in the future. And since the world is divided into states-nations, in an essentially Eurocentric view, this is conventionally traced back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. They are the main players in using such a weapon of war whenever they deem it necessary. So, it's certainly possible to speak of the use as a weapon and instrument of warfare widely cleared in the world of a state terrorism in the service of the interests of the elites who benefit from it. State terrorism developed in various forms and for various strategic interests, whether within the country itself or outside of it, but still always focused on securing an advantage for an elite interested only in maintaining and strengthening its own power and wealth. In this context, therefore, I would like to delve into what could be defined as geopolitical state terrorism. That is the use of state terrorism in a given context outside one's national borders. So, an external state terrorism most often having as its primary objective the destabilization of a government considered an enemy and possibly its replacement by manageable and controllable, hence friendly, elements. A terrorism that can guarantee, at least but not only in the early stages of action, various advantages. Among the most significant of them, the possibility of using actions prohibited by the various international conventions. Since most of the time terrorist elements are not believed to be direct emanations of the state that supports, finances, and guides them. The possibility of denying direct responsibility of the part of the attacking state. the possibility of not deploying official military forces so as not to run the risk of destabilizing the nation's internal quiet. All of this has been experienced, is being experienced, and unfortunately, I fear will certainly still be experienced in the future. Just to give a few glaring examples of regional and global geopolitical theaters that have experienced it and or are experiencing it. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been subjected, essentially since its inception, to terrorist actions both on its home soil and against its fellow citizens abroad. Terrorist activities carried out both directly by enemy countries and through no-state actors, supported by governments that aspire to the decapitation of Iran's leadership and its state model. Notable among the various no-state actors is certainly the MEC, an organization that has existed since before the revolution, led by Imam Ruhollah Khomeini, but which since the 1980s has set as its strategic goal to overthrow of the Islamic Republic. Overthrow also sought through unscrupulous terrorist actions that have left an impressive trail of blood and death. Just to mention a few examples. In the 1980s, a series of attacks on Iranian soil resulted in the deaths of dozens of people, including President Mohammad Ali Rajai and Prime Minister Mohammad Javad Bahonar. During the Iran-Iraq imposed war, the MEC sided with Saddam Hussein and conducted a whole series of attacks against Iran. The killing of several Iranian scientists, strongly sought by Tel Aviv, involved the MEC. Overall, deaths attributable to this organization are estimated at about 17,000. No state actor, the MEC, which has ample and decisive support from foreign countries that aspire precisely to the decapitation of the current Iranian political system. It's no coincidence that the MEC is hosted in Albania, a candidate country for EU membership, that it was taken off the list of terrorist organizations by both the European Union and the US, respectively in 2009 and 2012, with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and that it can propagate its truths in the highest level political fora, primarily in various Western countries. Speaking of which, one cannot forget the participation of MEC leader Mariam Rajavi in an event organized by the Luigi Einaudi Foundation in the Italian Parliament in mid-2023. Participation that featured her intervention in which she called for a strangulation of Iran by Western powers. Participation and intervention promptly condemned by the legitimate Iranian authorities, who pointed out how Tehran has always called for fighting terrorism in a unified manner and building positive relations among the countries of the world while respecting the sovereignty of each. The Republic of Cuba, since the triumph of the revolution led by Fidel Castro in 1959, has experienced decades of genuine foreign-sponsored terror. Attacks and sabotage actions enacted by Cuban counter-revolutionary elements and or directly by foreign agents with the aim of overthrowing the system of government established by the revolutionary leadership. Attacks and sabotage actions made possible by the broad support for these groups by, first and foremost, Washington. With the US death Alongside such an attempt, a direct slaughter has also sought to make scorched earth around the Caribbean island, both through the imposition of a unilateral and illegal embargo and by placing Havana on the list of states sponsoring terrorism. A reversal of reality which can only be defined with one word: scandalous. Just to give a few examples of the nefarious consequences of such a policy for the people there. In 1976, an attack, materially carried out by Cuba Orlando Bosch Avila, destroyed a civilian airplane claiming 73 totally innocent lives. In October 1992, an attack on the Hotel Mella in Varadero occurs, with the terrorists escaping into U.S. waters without consequences. In September 1997, bombs in the Trito, Miramar, Copacabana hotels and at the Bodeguita del Medio. And dozens more bombings and sabotage attempts to bring the Cuban people to their knees, to frighten tourists, so as to bend the island's economy and to undermine the foundations of the country's stability, well-being and peace. Attempts, however, failed, despite the trail of blood and death left on the ground, as a people's resilience and inner convictions often succeed in overcoming obstacles that may seem, at a more superficial glance, insurmountable. Attempts that have often failed not only in Cuba, but in so many other parts of the world, where abuse of power and violence have failed to permanently undermine the power and strength of people. Certainly the external power and strength, but above all inner power and strength of peoples convinced and proud of the need to develop their own path in life, a path free from malign and negative foreign interference and influence. And these are just some of the dramatic examples that have occurred in so many other parts of the world as well. With Latin America and the Caribbean being considered the backyard of the US, they were and certainly still are dramatically protagonists. And indeed, this was also tragically experienced by Chile of the 1960s and 1970s. That is, when Salvador Allende was about to become president and when he became president. So, a geopolitical state terrorism promoted by the United States of America and its agencies, always most committed to the overthrow of legitimate but unfriendly governments in Washington. Model Chile, then, as the archetype of an all-out hybrid warfare of one state against another, where terrorism in its various forms is one of the main and decisive weapons of the destabilization of the South American country, first, and the overthrow of the legitimate president later. An intervention strongly desired by Washington to prevent Allende and his associates from governing according to their ideas and agendas. Inasmuch as confirmed by disaggregated documents available in the U.S. National Security Archive. President Richard Nixon acknowledged that he instructed Corry, U.S. ambassador to Chile, to move on his behalf and do everything possible to prevent Allende from seizing power. Again, Nixon's national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, lobbied vigorously for a U.S. hard line because the example of a successfully elected Marxist government in Chile would surely have an impact and even precedent value on other parts of the world, and the imitative spread of similar phenomena elsewhere would in turn significantly affect the world balance and our position in it. To end with this conviction valid in so many other past, present, and certainly future theaters. Theaters where the liberal and liberalist model in line with the political West does not take root. I see no reason why a country should be allowed to become Marxist merely because its people are irresponsible. The issue is too important for Chilean voters to be left to decide for themselves. Henry Kissinger. In the details of the Chilean case and the use of terrorist tools to bring down Allende's socialist experiment, then the picture was one of the total hybrid warfare with full use of, among other things, acts of sabotage, pressure, subversion, and infiltration. Among other actions, some clear examples of this strategy. Funding and infiltration, primarily by the Central Intelligence Agency, of fifth and sixth columns into the ganglia of the state and in general, wherever necessary to destabilize the Allende government. Hundreds of millions spent by the US government to foment social anger, finance opposition parties, collapse the price of copper, and literally buy prominent personalities compliant to US wishes. Above all, Augusto Pinochet, the general who led the final coup of September 11, 1973, against the legitimate Chilean president. Throughout Allende's presidency, there were resounding strikes led by Central Intelligence Agency-backed unions and occupations of land newly distributed to peasants by large landowners. Actions that often resulted in outright acts of terrorism with deaths and violence of all kinds, as well as, for example, burning acres of crops and killing millions of cattle, trying to bring the Chilean population to its knees and starvation. Fascist groups funded by big domestic and foreign capital, primarily the US, were born to destabilize the situation. They carried out more than 600 attacks against critical infrastructure in the country, railways, bridges, etc., as well as violence against ordinary citizens. On June 16, 1971, thus about a year after Allende's election to the presidency, a man armed to the teeth and covered with explosives entered the headquarters of the National Police Investigation Corps, killing 3 loyal servants of the country and then blowing himself up. 3 of the many National Police Investigation Corps members who lost their lives during those years. On June 29, 1973, thus a few months before Pinochet's successful coup, another coup was attempted, led by Colonel Roberto Super Onfray. Finally, at the height of the tension and when Allende wanted to hold a referendum to ask the people whether they wanted to continue with his government or prefer to go to elections, there was the final coup by Augusto Pinochet. A coup fomented, prepared, and financed by the indispensable support of the US and its agency specializing in these actions, the Central Intelligence Agency. So, in conclusion, it's possible to say that terrorism, primarily that promoted and financed by state actors, is one of the deadliest weapons for the destabilization and overthrow of governments deemed hostile to a foreign power. terrorist actions that can be developed directly by elements that are part of a state, military, members of government agency, etc., or by elements that are external but take funding and orders from countries not directly traceable to them. Either way, a deleterious plug on international relations and respectful and peaceful coexistence among the peoples of the world. A plug to be eradicated. And in my opinion, one of the best tools to do so, or at any rate to radically diminish its use, is through the construction of a world less prone to abuse and more open to dialogue and respect for the singularities of the various popular poles that compose it. In essence, a fully multipolar world where the forces in their totality tend to be equivalent and maintain win-win relations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much to our guest, Mr. Alessandro Finetti from Italy, for their valuable insights and time. It was a pleasure having you on this conference. Now, let's move on to our next guest, who it is a privilege to introduce our next distinguished guest, Mr. Daniele Perra, journalist and geopolitical analyst from Italy. He has graciously prepared a video message to share his valuable insights with us. Let us now watch his presentation together. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, thanks for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to participate in such an important event. My name is Daniele Perra and I'm an Italian geopolitical analyst. I currently work for Eurasia, an Italian magazine of geopolitical studies, and recently I wrote a book about General Qasem Soleimani and his role in building the so-called axis of resistance and fighting terrorism all over Middle East or Western Asia, call it as you prefer. And I hope that soon this book will be translated in Persian as well. Going straight to the topic of today, I have been asked to speak about the relation between the State of Israel and terrorism, and the relation between the Zionist entity and the terrorist group named Mojahedin al-Khalq, which are well known by the name hypocrites, a name that has been given them by Imam Khomeini after their betrayal of the revolution. Well, let's start from the beginning, because the Zionist entity has been built on terrorism against the people of Palestine, that started right away after the famous Balfour Declaration of 1917. As we know, that declaration, released by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United Kingdom, allowed the Jewish immigrants to build a national home in Palestine, forgetting completely about the rights of the indigenous population of the area of Palestine, of course. Well, since then, the Zionist armed groups started to threaten and terrorize not only the Muslim population of Palestine or the Christian population of Palestine, but also the Jewish people that used to live there from centuries. Most of the political killings of the Zionist armed groups in the 20s, in the 30s and the 40s have been committed against the Palestinian Jewish who somehow did not accept Zionism, because Zionism, in their opinion, was actually a threat to their community and to the peaceful coexistence of the different faiths in Palestine before the explosion of Zionist migration. We know about the terrorist history of groups such Lehi, Irgun, the infamous Stern gang, which was responsible of terrorist attacks against Palestinian markets, open markets, bus stops, offices and so on, before and during the first Arab-Israeli war. All these groups, furthermore, together with Haganah, the initial core of the Zionist army, the so-called Tzahal, the Israeli Defense Force, played a big role also in fostering the ethnical cleansing of historical Palestinians with many massacres. Remember the terrible massacre of Deir Yassin, for instance. Not only this, they also used to pollute the wells of the Arab villages, and they also destroyed the houses of the Arabs. Historical sources say that they destroyed something like 400 or 500 Palestinian villages. And this strategy never stopped even after the official creation of the Zionist entity, thanks to the United Nations. And by the way, it is really curious the fact that the United Nations gave some kind of legitimation to Israel, while now Israel is trying constantly to delegitimate the United Nations. But this is another topic that probably would deserve another conference. Furthermore, Zionist terrorism operated also outside the land of historical Palestine, even in Italy, for example, where Zionist agents operated in order to foster their political target against their enemies at that time, the British, as well. And they committed not just some terrorist actions in Rome and other Italian cities in the late 40s. It's also a possibility that Zionist terrorism was behind the assassination of Enrico Mattei. Enrico Mattei was the man that was behind the building of strong economic ties between Italy and the Arab countries in the 50s, 60s of the previous centuries. A man that used to consider the Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, overthrown by the CIA and the MI6, the secret agencies of United States and United Kingdom, as an example of a struggle for the national interests. Unfortunately, Italy nowadays cannot try to follow its national interest because it's not a sovereign country. Our sovereignty belongs to the United States. Anyway, terrorism, in my opinion, is not just attacking people, civilian people and unarmed people. Terrorism, in my opinion, is also the attempt to obliterate history and culture. And also in this regard, Zionism tried and is keep trying to cancel Palestine and Palestinians from history. In 1967, when they occupied East Jerusalem, they demolished a district rich of history, of centuries of history, of the old town in order to make a square in front of the so-called Western Wall. And nowadays we know that they are somehow trying to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in order to build their third temple by digging tunnels under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of course. Nowadays, also, we witnessed Zionism terrorism in the Gaza Strip and in Lebanon, where they bombed and destroyed houses, hospitals, schools, and they desecrated churches, mosques, and Muslim and Christian cemeteries. This is, in my opinion, a pure manifestation of terrorism. And terrorism is also the violence of the settlers in the occupied territories. Let's not forget the brutal attack of a Zionist settler in the Ibrahim Mosque in Hebron in 1994, if I remember well, which killed over 30 Muslims who were there just for praying. That settler, Baruch Goldstein, was a member of the of an extremist group linked to the Rabbi Meir Kahane, who used to be a strong supporter of the total annihilation of Palestinian people. Well, Baruch Goldstein is considered a national hero by a large part of the Israelis. So yes, we can say that Israel is an entity built on terrorism. But let's talk now about the ties between Israel and terrorist groups outside of Palestine. Even in this case, Israel and its secret service has a long history of cooperation with many armed groups linked with terrorism. The first example that comes in my mind is the Southern Lebanese Army, that was responsible of many criminal acts during the Lebanese civil war. Not only this, of course. Israel played a specific role in the creation of the network of the Al-Qaeda network during the Afghan war in the 80s in cooperation with the United States and CIA. And in that case, Israel provided weapons that were stolen from the Egyptian arsenal in Sinai after the war in 1967. Provided weapons to the armed groups in Afghanistan. The Israeli Mossad, always in cooperation with CIA, played a big role in fostering the civil war in Algeria in the 90s and helping the terrorist groups in Caucasus during the 90s as well. As we know, the strategy of the United States in the area was to destabilize the southern border of the Russian Federation, and even now the target is to use these groups to destabilize the areas of transit for the energetic infrastructure or commercial infrastructures of Russia, China, and Iran as well. Another clear example of the special relation between Israel and terrorist groups, we saw it in the Syrian conflict. In this case, both Israel and United States helped the destruction of Syria through extremist armed groups. United States provided weapons and logistics thanks to the CIA Operation Timber Sycamore, for example. The operation has started during the Obama administration, and the objective of the operation was to provide weapons to the terrorist groups through Jordan and Turkey. Turkey, by the way, played also a big role in helping the so-called Islamic State smuggling crude oil between the borders of Syria, Iraq and Turkey itself. In that case, Israel provided intelligence and logistics to the armed groups in Syria through the occupied Golanades. While Israel's target in Syrian conflict, as we know, was to cut the links between Syria and Lebanon in order to stop the flow of arms to Hezbollah. Initially, they failed, and the Western strategy in Syria was defeated, thanks also to the work of General Soleimani that I quoted before. De facto, after his assassination by first Trump administration, Western strategy has been gradually restored until the fall of Damascus in the recent months. And now the heirs of Al-Qaeda are actually in power in Damascus. And it is as well pretty curious the fact that it is pretty curious the operation that Western media are doing in order to clean the image of the terrorists in Syria. Al-Julani, the leader of the Al-Nusra Front, the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda, a close friend of Ayman al-Zawahiri, who operated also together with the so-called Islamic State, the so-called Caliphate, at the beginning at least, is now a moderate politician who wears a suit and a tie. His crimes are part of the past, killing and terrorizing Shia Muslim or Christian or even Sunni Muslims are forgotten and forgiven by the West. And the Western countries can openly deal with him without the need of hiding this relation. Something similar actually happened with the Mujahideen al-Qaeda. In the first years of the 21st century, This organization used to be considered a terrorist group due to its ties with the Saddam Hussein regime. After the American-led coalition aggression against Iraq, Iran proposed as well a prisoner exchange with the US. Iran was willing to give the members of Al-Qaeda detained in its jails in exchange with members of the MEC, of the Mujahideen Khalq, detained in the American jails in Iraq. Washington refused. Why? Because they knew already that they could use them, the members of MEC, for covert operations inside Iran. And this is what actually happened. MEC has a long history of terrorist attacks inside Iran since the years after the revolution, when used to target members of the new Iranian institutions. After fought along Saddam Hussein regime during the war between the Islamic Republic and Iraq, and even in that case, Iraq was somehow helped by many ways by the West. This did not stop the West to fight and overthrow Saddam when he was not useful anymore to its geopolitical targets. And anyway, as we said, after 2003, MEC has been exploited by CIA and Mossad to carry on operations inside Iran, mainly against Iranian scientists and other personalities linked with the nuclear program. And the West, despite the fact that MEC is nowadays a sort of a pseudo-religious cult with its small territorial and political entity inside Albania, something pretty similar, by the way, with the initial Zionism, the West is still trying to clean up MEC reputation, showing its leaders as moderate politicians. Mariam Rajavi, for example, is acclaimed and hosted in many European parliaments. And still, there is someone that thinks about them as the future for Iran. Exactly the same that happened with the terrorist groups in Syria. So, we can say that this is the level of Western hypocrisy. Thanks for listening to me, and greetings to everyone.
A big thank you to our guest, Mr. Daniele Perra, from Italy, for their thoughtful discussion and sharing their expertise. Up next, we have another wonderful guest joining us. I am delighted to present Mr. Giulio Cinapi, journalist, editor-in-chief of the World Politics blog news agency, and geopolitical analyst from Italy. He has kindly shared a special video message filled with his insights and perspectives. Let's take a moment to view his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Giulio Cinapi. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this event, where I will address a complex and sensitive topic, namely the Western double standard on terrorism. This is an issue that not only questions our collective conscience, but when analyzed with clarity, reveals profound contradictions in the global narrative and the policies adopted by Western nations. When we talk about terrorism, we refer to one of the gravest threats to international security, state stability, and the lives of millions of people. However, the perception and response to terrorism seem to vary significantly depending on the origin, religion, or ideology of the perpetrators. This discrepancy is not accidental. It results from decades of political, economic, and media choices that have shaped a selective and, in many cases, deeply hypocritical narrative. A first example of this hypocrisy lies in the very definition of terrorism. While non-Western groups, often associated with the Islamic world, are labeled as terrorists, armed movements originating in Western contexts, such as white supremacist groups or far-right militias, are sometimes described with more lenient terms, such as rebels, militias, or even freedom fighters. This semantic asymmetry is not innocent. It shapes public opinion, directs security policies, and legitimizes selective military interventions. A second aspect to consider is media coverage. Attacks carried out by individuals or groups of Islamic origin receive disproportionate media attention, often accompanied by narratives that generalize and stigmatize entire religious communities. Conversely, attacks by white supremacist or nationalist groups, although equally severe, are often downplayed and relegated to local news stories. This disparity not only fuels stereotypes, but also prevents a balanced and comprehensive understanding of the actual terrorist threat. The consequences of this double standard are not limited to the media sphere. They are also reflected in the foreign policies and international relations. Take, for example, the Middle East. The West has often used the pretext of fighting terrorism to justify military interventions in this region. These interventions, far from combating terrorism, have destabilized entire countries and caused an incalculable number of civilian casualties. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Recent history is filled with interventions that, instead of solving the problem, have amplified it, creating fertile ground for the emergence and proliferation of new terrorist groups. A particularly emblematic example is Syria, where the West has often tolerated or even supported extremist groups such as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, an organization linked to Al-Qaeda, which today has become the de facto government of Syria with the tacit consent of Western powers. The recent developments in Syria underscore this double standard even further. Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, born Ahmad Hussein al-Shara, has emerged as the de facto leader of Syria following the fall of Bashar al-Assad and his government on December the 8th. Long regarded as a terrorist by much of the Western world and the international community, al-Jolani has suddenly been portrayed as the liberator of Syria from Assad's oppressive regime, a narrative heavily propagated by parts of the Western media in recent days. Al-Jolani leads HTS, an organization still designated as a terrorist entity by the United Nations and several governments, including those of the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Argentina, Indonesia, Turkey, and Russia, as well as the European Union. Despite being listed as one of the world's most wanted terrorists, with a $10 million US government bounty on his head, al-Jolani's transformation into a more acceptable figure is striking. HTS emerged in 2017 from a coalition of factions, primarily the Al-Nusra Front, a jihadist group formerly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. While HTS formally distanced itself from Al-Qaeda, many experts, including US officials, viewed this separation as a superficial maneuver, with enduring ties between the two groups. Under al-Jolani's leadership, HTS has committed numerous terrorist acts across Syria, often targeting civilians. These include the April 2015 abduction of 300 Kurdish civilians and the June 2015 massacre of 20 Druze villagers in Idlib province. Al-Jolani's ideological roots are deeply intertwined with those of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Egyptian terrorist who succeeded Osama bin Laden as Al-Qaeda's leader. In April 2013, al-Jolani pledged allegiance to al-Zawahiri, reinforcing his alignment with Al-Qaeda's agenda. Adding to his complex profile is his historical association with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the former leader of ISIS. Between 2011 and 2013, the two collaborated until ISIS severed ties with Al-Qaeda. Al-Jolani rejected this schism, maintaining loyalty to Al-Qaeda. His past also includes imprisonment by US forces in Iraq from 2006 to 2011, a period that likely shaped his later strategies and alliances. Despite this background, al-Jawlani has recently rebranded himself. Adopting Western-style military attire and trimming his beard, he has sought to protect a more moderate image. His rhetoric has shifted from advocating strict Sharia governance to calling for national unity, promising protection for minorities such as Christians and Druze. Analysts widely view this transformation as a calculated attempt to gain Western support and ease sanctions on Syria. This case epitomizes the Western double standard. While some terrorist groups are condemned unequivocally, others are tolerated or even supported when it aligns with strategic interests. The prioritization of Assad's downfall, due to his alliances with Russia, Iran, and his support for Palestine, illustrates how short-term geopolitical goals often override concerns about long-term consequences. Another case concerns Ukraine, where some paramilitary formations linked to far-right ideologies have been integrated into the national armed forces and celebrated as heroes in Western narratives, despite their involvement in acts that in other contexts would be classified as terrorism. We must also not forget the Zionist terrorism practiced by Israel against Palestinians, often ignored or justified. Military operations targeting civilians, the destruction of homes and infrastructure, and policies of occupation and apartheid are rarely described with the terms they deserve. This complicit silence epitomizes the double standard that characterizes the Western narrative. Meanwhile, violent movements operating in contexts favorable to Western interests are often ignored or even supported. Consider paramilitary groups in Latin America or militias in Africa, often funded and armed by Western powers to protect economic and geopolitical interests. This duplicity is one of the West's greatest contradictions. On the one hand, it proclaims itself the champion of democracy and human rights. On the other, it turns a blind eye, or both eyes, toward violence that serves its interests. The double standard also extends to the domestic policies of Western countries. In recent years, in response to the terrorist threat, laws have been introduced that drastically limit civil liberties in the name of national security. However, these laws are applied disproportionately, primarily targeting ethnic and religious minorities, fostering discrimination and marginalization. This exacerbates the problem, creating new social divisions and fertile ground for radicalization. In our view, it is essential to adopt a more honest and consistent approach to defining and combating terrorism. This means recognizing that violence knows no ideological or geographical boundaries, and that all forms of terrorism must be condemned and fought with equal determination. Secondly, the media and institutions must take responsibility for providing a balanced and non-stereotypical narrative. This entails a more accurate representation of the root causes of terrorism, which often lie in social, political, and economic injustices. Only by addressing these roots can we hope to build a safer and fairer society. Finally, it is crucial to rethink the foreign and security policies of Western countries, abandoning unilateral interventionist approaches in favor of multilateral and cooperative solutions. The fight against terrorism cannot be used as a tool to justify wars or pursue economic interests. It must be guided by principles of justice, equity, and respect for human rights. In conclusion, the Western double standard on terrorism is not just a matter of political or media inconsistency. It undermines the very credibility of the values the West claims to defend: freedom, democracy, and human rights. Only through a radical shift in perspective and action can we hope to overcome these contradictions and build a truly safer and fairer world for everyone.
We're grateful to our guest, Mr. Giulio Cinapi from Italy, for the valuable input and engaging speech. Let's turn our attention now to our next guest, who has plenty to share. I have the great honor of introducing Professor Olsi Jazeksu, Professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, Analyst of Islamic Issues and the terrorist group of MEK, Mujahideen Ikhaq, from Albania. He has prepared a thoughtful video message to share his knowledge with us. Please join me in watching his presentation. Thank you.
Dear organizers of the Terror Spring Institute, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'd like to thank you for organizing your annual conference on terrorism, state and non-state sponsored versions 2025. In this year's conference that we're organizing, we are going to discuss the danger that terrorism, when it is a state and non-state terrorism, represents to humanity and the modern nation state. The topic of my presentation for this year will be the parallels between Tahrir al-Sham and Mujahideen al-Haq. As many of you probably know, Albania, the country where I am originally from, is a country which since the year 2016 is hosting a terrorist organization known as the Mujahideen al-Haq. This terrorist organization, which was brought to Albania, started to come since 2013, but its main body of the foreign fighters or the terrorists, the jihadists, were relocated to Albania from Iraq in 2016. Since 2000, or better said, from 2017 to 2021, became a very problematic terrorist organization, not only for Iran, from where it originates from, but even for my home country, which is Albania, neighboring countries of Albania, countries of European Union, and so forth. This terrorist organization, which, as we know, it originates from Iran, and it was one of the organizations which fought against Shah. And then after the success of the Islamic Revolution, and because they couldn't take power and they couldn't turn Iran into a utopian Marxist terrorist state like the Mujahideen wanted, this organization has continued to wage war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. After being defeated and expelled from Iran and banned in 1981, the Mujahideen al-Haq, they will move to Iraq, where they will be hosted and supported by the regime of Saddam Hussein, and they will stay in Iraq from 1986 until 2013-16, and later from 2016 onwards, this organization will move to Albania, where since the year 2018, this organization is going to build even a paramilitary camp and a state within a state, known as Campi Imanzes in Albanian, or the Mujahideen called it Camp Ashraf III. So whatever the names that this organization uses, this organization became very problematic for the security of Albania. Why it became problematic is because when they were brought to Albania during the era of the Obama administration, the agreement between Albania and the United States was that the Mujahideens were supposed to come and find a safe haven, to find a shelter in Albania, and not to involve themselves in some terrorist activities. But what happened is that with the coming of President Donald Trump as the President of the United States in 2017, from 2017 to 2021, this organization, which was supposed to be sheltered in Albania for humanitarian reasons, suddenly became weaponized and was used by the American administration and Israeli Mossad to carry terrorist activities against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Some of the terrorist activities of this organization will be, number one, their very heavy collaboration with the Israeli regime and with Mossad. And there are very strong suspicions where many analysts and people who analyze and study this organization, it is proved beyond doubt that this organization started to collaborate with the Israeli state. And from their Camp Ashraf 3, which is located in Manus Duros, Albania, the Mujahideens, they were used by American and Israeli Secret Service to steer a number of protests against Iran, and moreover, to even help Israel with their assassination program against Iranian military personnel and scientists like the late Mohsin Fakhrizadeh. In 2018, the Mujahideens were in a way used by Israeli state and in the time Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to put pressure on the Trump administration and on the European governments to act against Iran. So what happened is that in March 2018, the Mujahideens, they claimed as if Iran had sent two terrorists to assassinate them. This was a fake news, which was proven by Albanian security agencies. Nevertheless, they used fake information in order to produce fake news and to create an atmosphere of fear and terror against Iran in Europe, because the Mujahideens claimed that Iran was about to carry a terrorist attack in Albania. And because of this, what happened is that the relations of Albania with Iran became strained, and CIA republished news, which fake news, which the Mujahideens distributed as if Iran was about to launch a terrorist attack against them, to blacken the image of Iran in Europe. The Mujahideens were very instrumental, and they were used by Israeli Mossad and the American administration to pressure European governments to retreat and to force them to retreat from the normal diplomatic and economic relations that they had with Iran until this time, and to help the Trump administration organize what Trump was named maximum pressure policy. So this organization, which until the year 2021, when Trump was in power, was used to support Israeli Mossad for their terrorist attacks against Iran. And moreover, they were even very instrumental on collaborating with Mossad to incite violent protests in Iran against the government by using disinformation. This organization has been very critical even for the security of Albania. Because of this organization and because of what this organization was doing within Albania, what happened is that Albania and Iran severed their diplomatic relations. So their diplomatic relations will be cut on September 7, 2022, after the Albanian government is going to, without proof, accuse Iran of carrying a cyber attack against the Albanian state. the activity of the Mujahideens destroyed the relations which Iran had with Albania, and Albania, since the era of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, has had excellent relations with Iran. The late leader of communist Albania, Enver Hoxha, he even praised the Islamic Revolution of Iran and Imam Khomeini as great revolutionaries who were standing against the Anglo-American imperialism in the Middle East. But what happened is that when Albania hosted this organization became the main reason for the destruction, for the cutting of the diplomatic relations between two nation states members of the United Nations, which are Iran and Albania. Now, leaving Mujahideen aside, let us come to another organization, the Jabhat al-Nusra, or otherwise known as the Tahrir al-Sham. We all are aware about what happened in Syria on 27 November 2024. On 27 November 2024, we had another terrorist organization, this time the so-called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an organization which since the year 2017 was led by an international terrorist, Ahmed al-Shara, otherwise known as Abu Hamid al-Jawlani. This organization, which was hosted in the Syrian region of Idlib and was under the protection of the Turkish government, became the organization which was used to topple the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad. And we know what happened. This organization, which was part of the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, Free Syrian Army revolt against the Syrian state, organized regime change war, which was organized by CIA in order to topple the Syrian government. This organization, which was defeated by the Syrian state, Russia and Iran, and since the year 2016 was isolated in the region of Idlib and was put under Turkish protection under the excuse of humanitarian reasons. What happened is that suddenly in 2024, in one of the most critical moments in the history of the state of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Iran, where these four states were part of the so-called axis of resistance and were fighting a joint war against the Israeli regime of Benjamin Netanyahu in response to the extermination or the genocide of the population of Gaza. So what happened is that as soon as Hezbollah, who was one of the main resistant groups of Lebanon, who was waging a resistance war against Israel, so as soon as Hezbollah signed a peace, signed a ceasefire, it was not them, it was the Lebanese state with the regime of Israel, this organization, which was hosted under humanitarian reasons in Idlib, was put into action by the Anglo-American establishment. Like many articles, there was an article in the British newspaper, The Times, which showed how the actions of Jabhat al-Nusra, or otherwise like what we know Al-Qaeda, were coordinated by the Anglo-Americans, who put into motion the attack that this terrorist organization is going to carry against the Syrian state. What happened is that this organization, which until this moment was protected and was justified by Turkey as an organization which was taking care of the Syrian refugees of the civil war, etc., suddenly came into action. It was weaponized and it was used to topple the Syrian state. Now, we have very strong parallels between Jabhat al-Nusra and Daesh. In an interview with James Jeffrey, who has been American ambassador to Albania, Iraq, and Turkey, gave in 2021 to the public broadcasting channel of the United States. This ex-American ambassador, who later will become the chief American official for the fight against ISIS or Daesh, he is going to reveal to the American public that Jabhat al-Nusra or Tahrir al-Sham and its terrorist commander Abu Hamid al-Jolani were nothing more but American agents. Ambassador Jeffrey has shown in the interview that has been published by PBS that the Tahrir al-Sham was put under American protection, and Americans made sure that either the government of President al-Assad nor ISIS or Daesh will harm and will destroy this organization. So what we have in here, we have a major American state official who shows to us how this terrorist organization, which was hosted in Idlib and protected by Turkey, was used by CIA and British MI6 to organize themselves, to train, and in the first moment that a nation state was in a critical moment, like it was Syria, after more than 1 year of participation against the Israeli state, this terrorist organization was put into action. It was weaponized, it was directed, it was funded, and it was thrown against the Syrian Arab Republic. And we know the result of what is happening in Syria today. Since 8th of December, when the Wahhabi Takfiri terrorists, they took power in Syria, they have started a sectarian war by killing minorities, be them Alevis, Druze, or Christians. And Syria has descended into a dictatorship. The Syrian Republic no longer exists. And moreover, this American British agent, who at the same time was an Israeli agent, the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, is openly declaring that Syria wants to make peace with Israel. And on the other hand, this new emirate, which has been established in Damascus, has cut the relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we have two terrorist organizations which are hosted by NATO member countries which happen to have Muslim majority, Turkey and Albania. Albania is hosting the Mujahideen al-Halq in Camp Ashraf 3 or in Manza, while Turkey's Erdogan was hosting Jabhat al-Nusra in Idlib under the Turkish army's protection. We have these two organizations which are being used against, in our case, Islamic Republic of Iran and Syrian Arab Republic. These two organizations, while the second one, Tahrir al-Sham, was used to organize a military coup against Syria, as soon as it came to power, it started to openly attack Iran. It cut the diplomatic relations with Iran and is telling to Israel that we, the new government of Jabhat al-Nusra, we love you and we don't love Iran and Palestine and the axis of resistance which Iran is supporting. We have same parallel even with the Mujahideen al-Halq. For people who follow the publications of Mariam Rajavi or her 10 points plan, Mariam Rajavi says exactly the same thing that Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani says. She goes to Western capitals and she declares to the British and to the Americans and to the Germans that if you support me and my terrorist army to come to power, once we come to power, we will fight and go against Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and of course, we will destroy Islam and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we will serve to Israel. Now, what are the lessons that we can draw from the example of Tahrir al-Sham and Mujahideen al-Hal is that even though both these organizations have been listed as terrorist organizations by Western governments and the United Nations and United Nations Security Council, etc., even though Western governments know that these organizations, they are terrorist organizations, when the Western or the Anglo-American empire needs them, they do not care about their terrorist designation. They weaponize and use them to attack against their enemies. And in this case, the enemy is Islam, Palestine, and the axis of resistance, which is led by Iran, which tries and fights and sponsors the liberation of the state of Palestine. Now, the lesson that we can draw from these two terrorist organizations is number one is that once you are a terrorist, you always remain a terrorist. Number two is that the NATO countries, like in the case of Albania, France, Germany, or even Turkey, who host these terrorist organizations under the excuse of humanitarian reasons, this is simply a deception. At the first moment when the Zionist regimes of the West need to attack the Palestinian and the Islamic resistance, they are going to use these terrorist organizations in order to destroy the war for the liberation of Palestine, which until 27 November 2024 was headed and directed by two Muslim nation states, which were Syria and Iran. But since 8 October 2024, Syria no longer exists. The Americans, in collaboration with the Turkish Secret Service, with the British and the Zionists, they have toppled the Syrian government. The Syrian state no longer exists. The Syrian state no longer exists as a unitary state. In this moment that we are debating here, we know very well that Syria has been divided between the Kurds, the Americans, the Turks, the terrorists of Al-Qaeda who rule Damascus, and from Israel, which is invading and capturing the most strategic territories of Syria. The example of Tahrir al-Sham and what the Zionists did to Syria under Abu Muhammad al-Golani or the terrorist group of Ahmed Shara should teach us and show to us what are the projects of the Zionist empire against Iran. The writings are on the wall. Mariam Rajavi has openly declared in her 10-point plan about the future of Iran that apart from decimating Islam, destroying the Vilayat al-Faqih, removing the Sharia, massacring the Islamic clergy, one of the most important points of Mariam Rajavi is that Iran will no longer be a unitary state. Mariam Rajavi has openly said that she is going to give autonomies to all the regions of Iran, which means that Iran will be turned into a second Syria. Iran will be dismantled as a nation state, and we will have the creation of a Kurdish state, of a Ahwazi state, or Arab state, a Baluchi state, a Sunni state, a Turkmen state, an Azeri state, and a Persian state. These are the plans of the Zionists. And the example of Syria and the example of the of the coup which was organized against the Syrian Arab Republic must show us and teach us that the terrorist organizations, they are very dangerous organizations for the future of humanity, stability, nation states, and in particular, the survival of the people of the Middle East. And they are the best weapon of international Zionism. Thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you to our guest, Olsi Jezexhu from Albania, for such a great discussion. It's time to move on to our next guest, and we're excited to hear their thoughts. Allow me to introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Robert Fantina, a university professor, author, and journalist from Canada. He has recorded a special video message to share his perspectives with us. Let's take a moment to watch it. Thank you.
Good day. It is a privilege for me to participate in today's important conference, and I thank the organizers for inviting me. Most terrorist actions would not be possible, at least not on the scale by which they are perpetrated today, without state sponsorship. The People's Mojahedin Organization, commonly referred to as the MEK, is one such terrorist organization that relies on outside support. This is a group that pretends to act on behalf of the people of Iran in supporting regime change in that country. Yet surveys and studies repeatedly indicate that it has little or no support among the people of Iran. Rather, it is an organization supported mainly by the United States in support of the United States' geopolitical goals in the Middle East. Now based in Albania, against the wishes of the Albanian people but at the behest of the U.S. government, the MEK is responsible for the deaths of countless numbers of innocent Iranians and journalists. It is able to remain in existence due to the financial and diplomatic support of the United States. And there we have the problem. The United States is the chief sponsor of state terrorism around the world. It doesn't limit its deadly involvement to the Middle East, as recent and distant history indicate. We'll look at a few facts. When she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton supported military action against the Syrian government to thwart an Israeli attack on Iran. It must be remembered that the United States supports Israel with $4 billion in weaponry annually. Influencing Israel to refrain from an attack on any country could have been accomplished then and today by simply threatening to withhold that money. Instead, Clinton supported military action against Syria to prevent Israel from bombing Iran. This is a very convoluted way of thinking. Today, the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad has ended, but if we can judge anything by history, its successor will be just as brutal, and will be supported by the United States. This parallels the history of U.S. involvement in Iran. In 1953, the United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The U.S. replaced him with the brutal Shah of Iran, who did the U.S. government's bidding but oppressed the people of Iran until his overthrow by a popular people's movement in 1979. As recently as the summer of 2023, the U.S. House of Representatives approved continued funding for what the U.S. refers to as a partner force in Syria, the YPG, a terrorist offshoot of the PKK. U.S.-supported terrorists in Syria are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. As I mentioned, the United States provides the apartheid state of Israel with approximately $4 billion yearly in weapons and other support. In 2024, that number was exceeded by hundreds of millions of dollars to assist Israel in committing genocide against the people of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. U.S. funding also enabled Israel to bomb Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran, and U.S. diplomatic support for Israel's war crimes and crimes against humanity extends to vetoing ceasefire resolutions in the completely ineffective United Nations Security Council. As a result, estimates of the number of deaths of Palestinians in Gaza range from over 45,000 to over 100,000, and the actual number may never be known. The U.S. military is responsible for an estimated 20 million deaths of men, women, and children just since the end of World War II. U.S. wars and military interventions just after 9/11 have taken a tremendous toll. A report from the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs issued in October of 2024 stated this, quote, At least 408,000 civilians in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen died as a direct result of the post-9/11 wars. Civilian deaths have also resulted from U.S. post-9/11 military operations in Somalia and other countries. An estimated additional 3.6 to 3.8 million people have died indirectly in these war zones. Close quote. These indirect deaths result from starvation, lack of medical attention, exposure to harsh weather conditions due to lack of adequate housing, which was lost to U.S.-provided bombs, and other consequences of U.S. aggression. In just these war zones, adding those who died indirectly as a result of these conditions, brings the death total to between 4.5 million and 4.7 million, and innocent people are still dying due to U.S. aggression as we speak. The U.S. does not just support terrorism in foreign nations. Domestically, the U.S. police force kills over 1,000 civilians annually, a rate that far exceeds that of other developed countries, with a disproportionate number of them being people of color. Class also plays a significant role in police killings, with the highest poverty areas having a police killing rate of 6.4 per million, while the lowest poverty areas have a police killing rate of 1.8 per million. Another group in Syria that the U.S. is accused of supporting is ISIS. U.S. spokespeople always deny that accusation, but there is overwhelming evidence to support it. Like Israel, the U.S. government believes that its word will be taken as the truth globally. However, the statements of U.S. officials are not often believed much beyond its own borders. Here and there one finds examples of non-state-sponsored violence, but these are often either very small groups or lone wolves, one person acting by himself. Non-state-sponsored violence can never have the impact that violence sponsored by the state has, simply because states, especially the United States, have the financial means to cause unspeakable terror and destruction. We see that most clearly today in the Gaza Strip. What can be done? Most notably, the United Nations Security Council, with only 15 members, must be reformed to eliminate the veto power granted to 5 of its members. The General Assembly, with 193 members, has no power to act. One must wonder why an organization that is supposed to foster democracy is structured in such an undemocratic manner. Additionally, nation-states that are aligned with the worst offenders must sever those ties. Numerous countries have diplomatic, military, and economic ties with the United States and Israel, and they must seek to create alliances with countries that support human rights and international law. Gross global injustices will continue until major changes are made by world governments and international bodies. Until this happens, state sponsors of terrorism will continue to act with impunity. Thank you.
Our heartfelt thanks go to our guest, Dr. Robert Fantina from Canada, for their insightful participation. Let's now welcome our next guest for another great conversation. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Giorgi Thanasi, a historian and political analyst from Albania. Today, we will watch a video message he has thoughtfully prepared for us. Let's enjoy his presentation. Thank you.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Giorgi Thanasi. I am an Albanian journalist and also a visiting lecturer at Alexander Moisiu Durrës University. MEK. Iranians came to Albania to settle here, or I better say to squat here, in 2013, some 200 of them. Later, up to 2016, at least 3,500 of them came to Albania. They are known by different names: Mujahideen of the People, MEK, Rajavi cult, Monafekin, Rajavi sect members, etc. They came to Albania allegedly on humanitarian grounds because their lives were threatened in Iraq, blah blah blah, and they are staying here. I'm afraid they will all die here. There are over 100 of them already dead, buried in the outskirts of Tirana in Kashari graveyard. One of them is buried in the communal graveyard of Manas, a small township, part of Durrës municipality, a strategic place. They have built there a camp, Ashraf III camp. Manas is between or among Durrës, the main port of Albania, Rinas Airport, the only functioning civilian airport of Albania, and Tirana, the capital city of Albania. Very special location. I consider their presence in Albania as a national security liability and also a public order threat. I shall elaborate my idea later on. What is wrong with them? They came here on humanitarian grounds, victims of terror, of Iranian regime, blah, blah, blah. They changed their so-called Ashraf III camp. I shall dwell later, I shall treat in detail what this camp is. A kind of barracks, a military installation to wage war against Iran. My country has never suffered an Iranian aggression. Not one square inch of Albanian land has been occupied the last 2,000 years by Iranians or Persians. So we have no grievance against Iran. We profit absolutely nothing if we change our Albania into a safe haven for ex-terrorists who want to wage war against the Iranian government. They want to wage war against the Iranian government. Okay, they can go to Iran and they can wage war there, but not using the territory of my country. Albania is a NATO member country, and using the territory of Albania to wage war against Iran, and not just war of words, but also war of Molotovs, war of kamikaze drones, war of stabbing public officials, war of using explosive charges against whatever, barracks, banks, seminaries, schools, municipality buildings, etc., etc. This is really too much. Albania does not deserve to suffer. Albania should not pay a price for the sake of this bunch of ex-terrorists who want to liberate their country, etc., etc. Let them go to Iran and try to liberate their country. They are trying since 1980, 1981, and they have failed. So let them try that. Now, national security threat. Why? It's obvious. Iran is a serious state, well armed. Iran has got a lot of wealth, oil, gas, iron, multi-branches industry. Iranian civilization is the heir of Persian civilization, over 3,000 years of civilization. So Iranians are not a bunch of tribes from the rainforest or living in some mountains there. No. Persian civilization is one of the 10 most valuable civilizations of the human race. So we endanger our national security using our country as a kind of barracks for those ex-terrorists to fight against their country. They want to fight against their country. It's their problem, it's not our problem. But using the land of Albania to wage war against Iran, this is a problem. And we have paid a price for it. There is an NGO, something like Homeland Justice. They staged several very disrupting and damaging online attacks against Albanian state institutions. It paid quite a price, though thanks to Homeland Justice, we learned more than one thing about the wrongdoings of the present government in Albania, the government of Premier Rama. And in a way, we should thank this NGO, this organization, Homeland Security, for showing Albanians what their government do with the money of the Albanian taxpayer. I believe the Monafeki and the members of MEK are a security threat to my country, not only because they disregard Albanian law, not only because quisling segments of Albanian police, Albanian public prosecutor, Albanian judiciary in general, just connive at their activities utterly violating Albanian law. They are a problem because of their past. Ex-terrorists, not all of them, but a lot of them, people who have stained their hands with Iranian blood, Kurdish blood, Iraqi blood, Shiites, Iraqi's blood, and also with some American blood, American civilians and American military. These are the persons who live less than 25 kilometers away from my home in Durrës. They live in Manners, which is a township of Durrës municipality. Plus, some of them have committed horrible crimes. There is one there called Cascavel Man who used an armored vehicle, Cascavel made in Brazil, to waste Kurdish women and kids when MEC, on behalf of Saddam Hussein, attacked Kurdish villages and small towns in 1991. What else? Such murderers, such ex-terrorists, such persons who have either battlefield experience, military experience, or they have been trained in terrorism and in military tactics by Mukhabarat, the secret service of Saddam Hussein, are part of Albania. Of course they are terrorists, of course they are a security liability to my country. Next, I am warning my government, Albanian government, that there is quite a possibility that the activities of Ashraf III against their country, Iran, might increase. In such a case, I want to publicly inform Premier Rama that Iran takes very seriously, I mean Iranian state, the struggle, the war against terrorism. Iran paid a steep price in money and blood to fight Daesh, the terrorists of Daesh, in Syria and in Iraq. Iran used missiles to hit terrorist barracks in the territory, the sovereign state of Pakistan. And Pakistan is a nuclear armed country. So, in order to fight against terrorism, Iran used missiles on the territory of a nuclear armed country. This is an example of how seriously Iran takes the fight, the war against terrorists. So, we get nothing allowing such terrorists to use the territory of Albania as a springboard to attack their own country. They do not love their own country. Okay, it's their problem. They want to change Iran into another Libya or into another Somalia. Okay, it's their problem. Why should they use Albania? Why should Albania have problems? And when I mean when I say problems, I mean grave problems with Iran for their sake. It's stupid and it is dangerous. Something else. Imagine that such persons walk free in Tirana, indoors, among Albanians. Let us imagine for a moment that they will continue their activity, they will use Molotov cocktails to set on fire banks and seminaries and barracks in Iran, they will stab police officers, they will murder Iranian clergymen, what are called imams. Okay, what is the end result? Can you imagine what Iran can do? What are the defenses of Albania against Iran? Zero, nil. Can our great ally, United States of America, bring to Albania several batteries of Patriot? No. I'm quite positive about it. Can our partner Israel bring his David Sling to protect Iran or to protect Doors? No, no way. So, Albanian government is risking a lot for nothing. What do these Mujahideen bring? Do they bring money? No, nothing. Of course, they launder money, but they do not bring investments here. Do they bring political support? Half a dozen four-star retired American generals, this is their support. Ex-premier of Canada or ex-foreign minister of Italy, that Senator Giulio Terzi. These are their supporters. They count very little. They count very little. Even if they publicly go against Albania, they cannot inhibit Albania in our goal to join EU, European Union.
We appreciate the time and expertise shared by our guest, Mr. Giorgi Thanasi from Albania. Coming up next, we have another exciting guest lined up. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Alireza Abedini, the head of the Yasin think tank, researcher, and geopolitical analyst from Iran. He has kindly prepared a video message to share his expert insights with us. Let us watch his presentation together. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. تروریسم غیر دولتی اونچه که امروز در جوامع شناخته میشه فی الواقع وجود نداره و در اصل این قسم از تروریست ها نیمه دولتی با حمایت کامل دولت های خارجی هستند. پس بهتره که گفته بشه تروریسم دولتی و نیمه دولتی. بهترین مثال برای تروریسم نیمه دولتی که تبدیل به دولتی و سپس به نیمه دولتی و در نهایت به تروریسم دولتی تبدیل شد، سازمان تروریستی مجاهدین خلقه که با عنوان فرقه تروریستی منافقین در ایران شناخته میشه. این فرقه پیشتر مورد حمایت دولت‌های آمریکا و فرانسه بود و شکلی نیمه دولتی داشت. با سفر مسعود رجوی در 17 خرداد سال 1365 به عراق و دادن دست همکاری به صدام برای جنگ با ایران، علنا و عملا این فرقه تبدیل به تروریسم دولتی شد و زیر پوشش دولت صدام حسین قرار داشت که از جمله اقداماتش در دفاع مقدس برای صدام حسین میتوان به جاسوسی، شنود بیسیم‌های رزمندگان اسلام و دادن گرا به هواپیماهای جنگنده ارتش عراق بود که باعث شهادت هزاران مرد و زن و کودک بیگناه ایرانی شد. پس از سقوط صدام این فرقه منفور تبدیل به تروریست نیمه دولتی شد و با لابیگری افرادی نظیر علیرضا جعفرزاده و علی صفوی در واشنگتن و با تأسیس انجمن‌ها و انجیوهای سیاسی و حقوق بشری در آلمان و به کارگیری سیاستمداران و نمایندگان بازنشسته و پرداخت حقوق به آنان به جهت لابیگری برای فرقه، این فرقه تبدیل به تروریسم نیمه دولتی شد و حمایت دولت‌های آمریکا و آلمان رو به دست گرفت. آلمان نیز به تبعیت از آمریکا و با لابیگری مستمره‌بگیران آلمانی منافقین به جرگه حامیان منافقین پیوست و ساختمان‌هایی رو برای فعالیت‌های اونها در شهرهای برلین و کلن به این تروریست‌ها اختصاص داد. فرقه تروریستی رجوی یک فرقه تروریستی نیمه دولتی بود که با خدمت به دولت‌ها از طریق اقدام علیه امنیت ملی، بغی و جاسوسی تونسته بود از یک گروه تروریستی دولتی در دولت صدام به یک گروه تروریستی نیمه دولتی تغییر ماهیت بده. اما پس از انتخاب بایدن به ریاست جمهوری آمریکا به دلایل سیاسی، آمریکا این فرقه را تحت پوشش رژیم صهیونیستی قرار داد و مجددا ماهیت مجاهدین خلق از تروریست نیمه دولتی به تروریست دولتی تغییر پیدا کرد و فرقه همکنون زیر مجموعه رژیم صهیونیستی تعریف میشه. همونطوری که پیشتر عنوان شد، تروریستای مجاهدین خلق به عنوان مستشار در خدمت داعش بودند و با هماهنگی و ارتباطات این فرقه با عوامل حزب بعث، عزت الدوری معاون صدام فرمانده نیروهای داعش رو به دست گرفت و همچنین موصل به داعش تحویل داده شد. این بار نیز در خصوص سوریه، مریم رجوی در جلسات سران مخالف بشار اسد در مجامع مختلف حضور فیزیکی یا آنلاین داشت و تروریستای زیر دستش به عنوان جاسوس بیسیم‌های نیروهای مدافع حرم ایرانی و افغانستانی این بیسیم‌ها را شنود می‌کردند و نتیجه را به رژیم صهیونیستی گزارش می‌دادند. پس از انتقال تلویزیون ضد ایرانی ایران اینترنشنال به تل‌آویو و قرار گرفتن این تلویزیون تحت پوشش رژیم صهیونیستی، اکثریت قریب به اتفاق کارشناسان این برنامه بنا به گفته یکی از فعالین ضد انقلاب در آمریکا از اعضا و هواداران مخفی و پنهانی رژیم فرقه تروریستی رجوی هستند که زیر نظر موساد و دولت رژیم صهیونیستی اداره میشن. از اونجایی که نابودی ایران و تجزیه کشور از طریق جنگ و عملیات نظامی ممکن نیست، لذا دشمن در صدد تا با افزایش جرم و جنایت و ایجاد اخبار فیک و اقدام تروریستی حتی در مدارس کشور موج بزرگی از نارضایتی عمومی رو رقم بزنه تا بتونه از کنش خودش واکنشی ضد ایرانی رو بهره برداری بکنه. این دست عملیات‌های تروریستی توسط عوامل مجاهدین خلق که کانون‌های شورشی نامگذاری شدند صورت میگیره و پس از انجام این عملیات‌های تروریستی با نسبت دادن این عملیات‌ها به نظام و ایجاد پروپاگاندای رسانه‌ای و تبلیغات در شبکه‌های اجتماعی در فضای مجازی موج خشم و اعتراض رو در مردم به وجود میارن. یک مبحثی وجود داره در حوزه تروریسم و اون هم تروریسم کور هستش یا ترور کور که خرابکاری و اغتشاش اقدام به عملیات جنایی در کشور رو بدون داشتن قربانی مشخص انجام میده، به گونه‌ای که اینها میان در کشور و عملیاتی رو انجام میدند که به واسطه این عملیات افراد غیر نظامی قربانی میشن، صرفاً برای ایجاد ناامنی و اتهام زدن و محکوم کردن نظام سیاسی حاکم بر اون کشور با هدف ایجاد خشم علیه دولت و حاکمیته که گاهن دیده شده که حتی تحت عنوان وابستگان یا نیروهای نظامی و انتظامی کشور این عملیات ها رو انجام میدن. به عنوان مثال میتونیم در سالهای اخیر میتونیم از عملیات حملات شیمیایی به مدارس دخترانه پس از اغتشاشات زن زندگی آزادی اشاره کنیم که توسط منافقین عملیاتی شد و کشورهای غربی و رسانه‌های غربی ایران رو به زن ستیزی محکوم کردن. در روزهایی که اغتشاشات زن زندگی آزادی رقم میخورد، در طی مطلبی عنوان شد که فرقه تروریستی منافقین یک هدفی رو دنبال میکنه و اون هم قطع پروازهای مستقیم از ایران به اروپا هستش و همینطور بستن کنسولگری های ایران و سفارت ایران در کشورهای اروپایی مخصوصا آلمان که این هدف رو بهش دست پیدا کردن. لابی های منافقین در موفق شدن تا دولت های اروپایی رو به تحریم ایران ایر مجاب کنن و بعد از اون دولت آلمان به طور یک جانبه کنسولگری های ایران رو در شهرهای مونیخ، هامبورگ و فرانکفورت تعطیل کرد تا تا منافقین و رژیم صهیونیستی به اهدافشون برسن. این تعطیلی به این دلیل هستش که افرادی که به ایران سفر میکنن و به خارج از کشور میان، اینها تبلیغات منافقین علیه ایران رو خنثی میکنند و برای اینکه بتونن جلوی این خنثی‌سازی تبلیغات رو بگیرند مجبور بودند که که پروازهای مستقیم به ایران رو و دادن خدمات کنسولی رو اینها از بین ببرند تا بتونن که به اهدافشون دست پیدا بکنن. تنها در صورتی میشه از تروریسم نیمه دولتی در ایران جلوگیری کرد، مخصوصا از منافقین، که دادگاه‌های رسیدگی به جنایات منافقین یک دادگاه فرسایشی نشه و به نتیجه مطلوب برسه تا از طریق مراجع قانونی اعضای اصلی فرقه جهت محاکمه و اجرای حکم به ایران برگردونده بشن. همونطور که میدونیم افرادی که در کشور خودشون به دلیل اقدام به جرم یا جنایت یا قتلی، چه از طریق آمریت، چه عملیات و حتی چه مشارکت، تحت تعقیب و پیگرد قانونی قرار بگیرند و پیگرد قانونی و قضایی قرار بگیرند، اینها به هیچ عنوان در صورت پناهندگی تحت پوشش کنوانسیون ژنو قرار نمیگیرند و دولت‌های که اینا رو به عنوان پناهنده پذیرفتند موظف هستند که برای اجرای حکم اینها رو به کشور مطبوعشون تحویل بدن. به همین دلیل دادگاه‌ها میتونند که دادگاه داخل کشور، مخصوصا دادگاه رسیدگی به جنایات منافقین، میتونه که از این طریق منافقین رو برای اجرای حکم و برای محاکمه و اجرای حکم داخل کشور بازگردونه. تروریست‌های نیمه دولتی یا به عبارتی تروریست‌ها با روابط پنهان دولتی به جهت دستیابی به اهداف دشمنان یک ملت دست به هر اقدامی به جهت رسیدن به هدف از پیش تعیین شده میزنن و بنابر اعتقاد اکثریت قریب به اتفاق اونها هدف وسیله رو توجیه میکنه که برای رسیدن به هدف دست به هر جنایتی حتی علیه کودکان و زنان و کودکان خردسال میزنند که نمونه بارز این شعار کشتار زنان و کودکان بیگناه در دهه 60 شمسی هستش که زنان و کودکان ایرانی رو اینها به شهادت رسوندند. همینطور مشارکت اینها در جنایتی که علیه کردهای عراق صورت گرفت. تروریسم خواه دولتی و خواه از نوع نیمه دولتی در ذات خود جنایت رو نهادینه کرده و قتل و کشتار رو به عنوان یک وظیفه برای خودش تعریف میکنه. از بود روانشناختی در برخی از اعضای این گروه‌های فرقه‌های تروریستی جنایت و کشتار انسان‌های بیگناه به عنوان یک نیاز روحی تعریف میشه. برای خنثی کردن این نیاز روحی ما شاهد پدیده نوظهور هستیم در سالهای اخیر به عنوان تروریسم مجازی. در این نوع از تروریست با ناامن کردن فضای مجازی از طریق تهدید و ارعاب و فحاشی سعی در منفعل کردن کاربران مخالف خودش داره تا بتونه بدون مزاحمت اخبار فیک عملیات‌هایی که خود رقم زده رو منتشر بکنه و افکار عمومی رو به دست بگیره و با خود همراه بکنه. بنا به اذعان جدا شدگان گروهک تروریستی منافقین، افرادی که در عراق برای کشتن مردم ایران اسلحه به دست گرفته بودند، همینک برای ناامن کردن ایران و پروپاگاندا در شبکه‌های مجازی و پیش بردن اهداف تروریستی فرقه، هر کدومشون بیش از 10 اکانت دارن تا علاوه بر ترورهای فیزیکی، ترورهای مجازی رو نیز در کارنامه خودشون ثبت بکنن. با تشکر از وقتی که در اختیار بنده گذاشتید.
We'd like to express our gratitude to our previous guest, Mr. Alireza Abedini, from Iran, for their engaging contributions. Now, let's turn our focus to our next guest. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Maria Marigi, archaeologist, writer, and researcher of Islam and fundamentalist movements from Italy. He has graciously provided a video message to convey his insights to us. Let's take a moment to view his presentation. Thank you.
Terrorist activities and organized crime in Tirana and Paris over the last 2 years. Albania. On Tuesday, June 19, 2024, reports emerged that Albanian police conducted a raid on the headquarters of the Mujahideen organization in Albania. According to reports, the police acted following a court order due to violations of established agreements. During the raid, the organization's members resisted law enforcement efforts. Albania Daily News reported that, on June 29, police conducted another operation at the Mujahideen group's headquarters in the Mans area of Ders. During the operation, the police confiscated computers and other electronic devices. The outlet emphasized that inspections at the camp aimed to combat cyber attacks and terrorist activities, as there were suspicions of individuals engaged in illegal activities within the camp. France. French police, after raiding the Mujahideen headquarters in Paris and discovering documents related to money laundering, espionage equipment, weapons, and unauthorized members, issued a travel ban for the 70-year-old leader of the organization. This was to facilitate the investigation of charges against him. On June 23, French police conducted an operation at one of the Mujahideen's offices in Paris, where they discovered weapons and arrested 3 members of the organization. Mariam Rajavi, the organization's leader, was reportedly in serious health condition, with her medical team losing hope of recovery. She had already been barred from entering or leaving Albania by authorities the previous year. The fate of dissident members of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. More than 5 decades since its founding, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran has shown striking similarities to a militant sect of the Church of Scientology, having been involved in numerous bombings, acts of sabotage, and murders. Since its creation in 1963, the organization has been accused of causing the deaths of thousands of Iranians. However, it appears that the organization's greatest victims might have been its own members. Interviews with former members in Europe reveal that the Mujahideen detained, disappeared, and tortured many of their adherents. Women were often forced into sexual relationships with Masoud Rajavi, and some were sterilized to ensure complete loyalty to the organization. The group collaborated with Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, and the Iranian forces Operation Mersad on July 27, 1988, nearly obliterated them. This led to the issuance of a decree of ideological revolution, fostering an atmosphere of fear at Camp Ashraf. Detailed accounts from former members. Early English reports on the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran were published by Human Rights Watch and the Rand Corporation following the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Interviews with 6 former members, who held prominent roles within the organization and now live in Europe, reveal a detailed account of life within Camp Ashraf. In March 2020, The Intercept published a report based on interviews with these 6 defectors, providing one of the most comprehensive accounts of life inside Camp Ashraf. Interviewees stated that only other organization members could truly understand their experiences. For over 2 decades, they had no contact with their families, as the organization prohibited communication even with close relatives. These individuals were subjected to both physical and psychological enslavement. One former member expressed deep regret for losing contact with his son for an extended period. He explained that he joined the organization in Canada in 1986, raising funds on its behalf. After some time in the United States, he was sent to Camp Ashraf in 1996 for mandatory military training. The organization's leaders had promised him that his son would be returned to his mother in Canada and receive monthly financial support in exchange for his involvement in operations in Iran. However, he was denied any contact with his family or the outside world. The first external contact he had was in 2003 when U.S. military forces entered Camp Ashraf. After speaking with a friend, he discovered that his son was still in Iran, being raised by his grandparents, while Canadian police had accused him of kidnapping. Attempts to reunite with his son led to violent arrests by the Mujahideen, who allegedly intended to make him disappear. In one desperate escape attempt, he fled from a moving truck headed for Abu Ghraib and sought help from passers-by, ultimately succeeding in his escape. Another high-ranking former member, who left the organization in 2014 after 34 years, stated, "I didn't know if I was alive or dead. When I used the internet for the first time, I learned the truth. I began researching cults and realized we were like robots. After years of sacrifice for the organization, he came to understand that he had been trapped in a totalitarian system. Insights into abuse and suppression. The Intercept cited statements from 2 women who had escaped the Mujahideen, revealing that the organization, contrary to its claims, did not value women. One woman, who joined the Mujahideen in the 1980s on her husband's advice, stated, "Women were merely tools to control men. They took my children, aged 6 months and 5 years, and subjected me to brainwashing like other members." Mariam Rajavi encouraged us to seek relationships with Masoud Rajavi. Another woman described enduring severe torture and sterilization during her time with the organization. She stated, "Women were brought in groups of 20 to 30 for sterilization. I resisted for years but was ultimately sterilized in 2011. After my escape, I felt nothing even when I reunited with my brother. The organization had destroyed my life." One dissident noted that the organization used orphaned Iraqi children as recruits and questioned its opaque funding sources. The report detailed extensive lobbying efforts to remove the organization from the U.S. list of terrorist groups, with financial support from Israel and backing from American politicians like John Bolton and Rudy Giuliani. Human rights violations and global criticism. Reports by Human Rights Watch, 2006, and The Guardian highlighted abuses against both Iranian citizens and Mujahideen members, including prolonged detention, physical and sexual abuse, and torture. The FBI, in a 2023 report, confirmed the organization's involvement in planning terrorist acts and noted its efforts to establish lobbying offices in Washington under the guise of human rights advocacy. Despite these efforts, the organization faces growing criticism for its history of violence and support for Saddam Hussein. According to CNN, July 2023, the Mujahideen is on the brink of collapse, with most of its members now aged 50 to 60.
A warm thank you to our previous guest, Dr. Maria Marigi from Italy, for sharing their knowledge and perspective. Now, let's move on to our next guest, who has plenty to add to the discussion. It is my privilege to present Mrs. Bobana Angelkovic, journalist and geopolitical analyst from Serbia. She has prepared a video message to offer his insights, which we will now watch together. Thank you.
Salam alaikum. Behame, Baradaran, wa Hoharan, Irani. I would like to thank to everyone from the Terror Spring organization for this important conference, and my special thanks go to my brother Alireza Niknam. Thank you, Alireza, for everything what you do, and may God bless you. First of all, I want to express my condolences to Iranian people and Iranian state about the terrorist attack on Saturday when 2 important judges from Supreme Court of Iran were assassinated. And I truly hope that the death of Mr. Mohammed Moghsek and Ali Razini will be in future put light on them, and that those who ordered the assassinations will be brought to justice sooner or later. I would like to sketch a general image or scheme of network of people, organizations, and internationally recognized countries which are deeply involved in creating, organizing, and maintaining globally spread terrorism. At the end of the Second World War, the alliance was made in United Kingdom and United States among their foreign policy and other departments of the state apparatus, their intelligence and security agencies and criminal gangs, in order to achieve something what we know today as they call it the rule-based order. Even during the Second World War, the criminal gangs of both countries and well-known mafia clans were of critical help to Western military forces in achieving some success. So if we are looking at that matters from today's perspective, the Western Allied success in World War II cannot be described as military success or defined because their military was helped by criminal gangs. The same goes for the entire period of time from the end of the World War II until happenings today. After the Second World War, the ties with Italian and Irish mafia were maintained and strengthened, but the strongest ties, especially in the United States and United Kingdom, were with the Jewish mafia clans. That alliance in the United States even got its own name. It was named the National Crime Syndicate, and the aim was not only the stealing of Palestinian land, occupying it and exterminating people from there, but also to conduct some other lucrative businesses, because being there legal or not, and since the state apparatus was involved in those businesses, they had to stay shady, and the mafia clans were those who were conducting it. Those businesses were from drug trafficking, helping groups like Nazis to escape justice in Europe, then knowledge and information hacking, smuggling diamonds or other precious metals from stolen or colonized African and Asian mines, to today's lucrative businesses like gambling, prostitution, pornography, and human trafficking or human organs trafficking. If human organ traffic is in question, it started to be a big business during instigated inner wars within former Yugoslavia, and culminated with the so-called Yellow House, which was in Albania at the end of 90s, where Shqiptar terrorists were executors of Western clans' plans to harvest Serbian people's organs. Serbs were brought there in order to extract their organs, and afterwards people were left to die in nightmares of pain and molestation. Be it coincidence or not, in all important medical dirty jobs in stealing organs from Serbian people, there was always some Jewish medical doctor involved. Also there were Turkish doctors as well. Some of them were even arrested in some airports a few years ago. But still, entire Western clan denies the existence of Yellow House in Albania. To get back to the beginning of the National Crime Syndicate, one of the main figures in Jewish underworld in the USA after Second World War was Meir Lansky, and the other was Bugsy Siegel. They were well aligned with US and UK intel and security agencies, which always provide cover-ups for criminal activities of business clans. Actually, it was not that were only criminal clans, since official state organs started to be involved. So it can be said that it was also state business. Meir Lansky was also very closely connected to Charles Lucky Luciano, one of the Italian mobsters, who helped Western Allied military in activities connected in so-called Battle of Normandy at the end of the Second World War. Meir Lansky's other name or nickname was also Mob's accountant, and he was one of the main figures, together with Lucky Luciano, in developing the National Crime Syndicate, together with the official bodies of mostly US and UK as some advisory body in all that. Bugsy Siegel was also a very crucial figure in building and developing Las Vegas Strip. Also today we know that the most of the business is connected to gambling, pornography, show business or in other ways like music industry or film industry in Hollywood are also connected to Jewish people, being them mobsters or not. And we even have today I don't know which country it was, but there is a Jewish rabbi who runs, owns and operates a pornographic website along with his own daughter. I would like also to go back to the roots of terrorism, which we know today, which we know as it is today, in Gaza Strip, in West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and not to forget Iraq and many other countries in Asia or Africa, and sometimes it also happens in the parts of Europe. At the beginning of the British Mandate in Palestine, when Ottomans went away, the developing and the spreading Zionist movement had sent its troops, like some terrorist gangs, to the territory of occupied Palestine during the British Mandate. So those organizations were kind of predecessors or vanguards of the Zionist entity government. One of those organizations was Haganah, a paramilitary organization which operated on occupied Palestine during the British Mandate, from the end of the First World War to the end of the Second World War and up to the creation of Zionist entity. From today's available information and documents, we can say it was a kind of a Jewish transitional military clan which overtook Palestine from Brits, and it was not by force, but Brits helped Haganah as much as they could. It is also important to be mentioned that Brits actually never left occupied Palestine, but still serve as guardians and advisors to Zionists. The other organization was the Jewish Agency, a kind of shadow or pre-state government, and its purpose was similar to Haganah's, to serve as a transitional or para-administrative body during the British Mandate. But that para-administrative body had a full support from Brits as well. The third organization is the most well-known among the mentioned ones. It was Irgun. Irgun was actually the outpost of Haganah, but it was established later. It is well known also as a paramilitary Jewish organization or terrorist Jewish organization, where most of the first politicians and officials of the Zionist entity came from. The same model was used in southern Serbian province of Kosovo and Metohija at the end of 90s of the 20th century, when our Kosovo and Metohija were occupied by NATO troops, but the entire region was given to be administered by Shqiptar terrorists who only changed their uniforms for expensive suits. Something similar has happened with the bloodthirsty terrorist Al-Jolani in Syria recently. So the alliance between US and UK and later EU government, their intel and security agencies of those countries and criminal clans was established, and operational network was made. And after World War II, the port of New York was controlled by the mobsters, of course. One of those who was able to organize and supervise deliveries of US weapons to occupied Palestine and to be given to Jewish terrorist groups was earlier mentioned Meir Lansky. After several meetings and coordination with Haganah's emissaries in New York City port, Lansky has been in charge for providing and securing the US weapons to safely arrive to the Jewish terrorists in occupied Palestine, where British mandate was only helping to the Jewish terrorists to achieve their goals. If we can speak in today's representations and descriptions what is what and who is who, it can be said that National Crime Syndicate was one of the first organized crime groups, which has the same characteristics as many of them today, or more precise, today's organized crime groups are tentacles or progeny of the National Crime Syndicate. Another prominent mobster figure who was involved in National Crime Syndicate was West Coast US mobster Mickey Cohen. He wrote in his autobiography that he was so obsessed to help the creation of the Zionist entity that he neglected his own activities and businesses because of the fundraising for Irgun, for example. In his memoirs he wrote, quote, "I got involved with this goddamn Israel war for 3 years." End of quote. It is kind of a direct confirmation that Jews who came to Palestine in order to instigate a war against Palestinians were helped by the Brits and Yanks in order to take over Palestinian soils and to create Zionist entity by war, by the means of war. One of the other links between underworld figures and governmental parts of the crime syndicate was a highly ranked mafia assassin, Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, who later became an informant for the US government. The other Jewish criminal gang in the East Coast was in charge to provide and secure the shipping of US warplanes for Jews during the so-called Arab-Israeli war. The deal was also made that British pilots and British crew will operate those warplanes when delivered to the Jews and Zionists in Egypt. Official info is that due to weather conditions, the shipment was never accomplished from the military base in Newark, New Jersey. Some of the Jewish, American and British mobster saw themselves as almost biblical warriors for the Jewish cause, as they said themselves. After the network being key parts of government and criminal gangs was established, and during the development of other networks, not necessarily directly connected, but surely in the same path as National Crime Syndicate, the next steps were made. And the next steps were smuggling of weapons, which continued throughout decades until today. But there were also some other things within the structures of the countries which help Jews and especially Zionists, which were meant to be accomplished in order to help their cause, and from the perspective of legality, those other activities were legal and official ones. One of the goals was to infiltrate every segment in Western countries and societies under the false pretexts, which, if we look back to the process, mostly aligns and overlaps with the activities of Soros network, and which infected many societies worldwide, and it's mostly connected to the legal systems of various countries. One of the goals was also to present the Jewish cause through so-called international organizations, which were more pro-Western than international, but they had that phrase and they were presenting themselves as international in order to deceive. And that was also made by purpose. Also, official pro-Jewish lobby groups were established in the Western world. In United States, ADL and AIPAC, and in the UK, Friends of Israel. And there are various tentacles of the Friends of Israel. There is Conservative Friends of Israel, there is Labour Friends of Israel, and there is Liberal Democrats Friends of Israel. All three, the biggest three parties, political parties in the UK. In the EU structure, there are many executive acts which are dedicated to the protection and support of every kind of Jewish and Zionist activity. Some countries, like Germany, introduced new obligatory steps in the process of getting German citizenships. Every future German citizen has to sign on obligation to support and help and not endanger the existence of the Zionist entity. France, the Netherlands, and some other less prominent members of the EU, but still Zionist stooges, have the law which bans any kind of critique of Jews, of Jewish affairs, of Zionist entity, and everything of those can be proclaimed anti-Semitic. The same goes for the UK, which has left European Union, but it did not leave its colonial appetites, as other colonial countries from EU also did not. Another important issue is self-given right by Western colonial and now Western organized criminal clan to define and evaluate whether some organization is terrorist or not. The most important characteristic of that list is that it is very fluid. Some organization can be listed terrorist today and removed from that list tomorrow if organization agrees to work on behalf of Western interest. And this is not diplomacy, this is not international affairs, this is not political deal, this is not bilateral agreement or else. It's pure criminal behavior by blackmailing. If certain organizations recognize the higher powers of the Western criminal clan, it stops being terrorist and becomes freedom fighters organization. That things happened with Mujahedin al-Khalq and with already mentioned UCK from Albania, which operates in southern Serbian occupied region of Kosovo and Metohija, and is supported by official NATO mission in Kosovo and Metohija. There is also an important note, there is United Nations troops in Kosovo and Metohija, which are called KFOR, but actually they don't consist of United Nations. They consist only of NATO countries. So it is also double NATO in Kosovo and Metohija. If we fast forward to these days from 90s, from the end of the Second World War, we can see that the scheme is the same, only more developed and bigger. The same alliance from the end of the World War II. And those only in short mentioned issues can serve as a general sketch or scheme how international terrorism network functions and what it consists of. It is rooted in Western colonial countries' network, which has been grooming Zionist movement and entity for more than a century. Today's actually Zionist movement more than a century. Today's Zionism is almost equal as Western neoliberalism and neocolonialism. Today's support for Zionist entity and its obvious genocide and terrorism comes from the same or overlapping structures, from officials of Western countries or allies to officials from transnational or multinational companies which finance either existence or the Zionist entity operations and businesses and its occupation of Palestine and other wars. From the other direction, Western countries unconditionally accept everything which comes from Zionist, especially in the sector of ICT and high-tech products and services, which Zionist entity imposes to its allies and friends. And although it is dangerous and unreliable, for some reason all of Western countries are somehow involved in that circle of ICT and high-tech products from Zionists, so they can be under surveillance. Westerners and Zionists also weaponize economic and financial tools or system which they imposed globally under the false pretext, and now they try to switch on or switch off countries from those tools and systems as they are pleased, which is also some kind of global terrorism, but in financial or economic way. One of the common and mutual habits of Westerners and Zionists is that they change names of their operational entities in order to deceive or cover their next moves. The other successful and growing tactics of Westerners and Zionists are individual assassination acts as acts of terrorism. We have that mostly in West Asia, in Russia, and sometimes in Europe or in the United States. But for the assassinations in Europe or in the United States, we hardly know anything. The situation in former Ukraine, as well as in the Zionist entity these days, also highlights the close cooperation between Nazism, Zionism, and neoliberalism. And we can even say that it is the same war, but not the same battlefield. The presence of certain Muslim countries in this unholy alliance of Zionism, Nazism, and neoliberalism serves to deceive that there are some Muslims who support terrorism and who are actually the real terrorists. And that is the reason why many Muslim countries should ask themselves what they are doing and should be ashamed of their activities and actions and their apathy toward problems in the Muslim world, and enthusiasm on the other side regarding cooperation with Westerners and Jews or Zionists. If we observe and analyze the developments and events connected to terrorism today, we can conclude that it is not really possible to differ or separate state and non-state sponsored versions of terrorism, because the source is always the same. And it can be having many tentacles, because the sources and origins of terrorism are now so much interlaced and are interlaced and overlapped in official countries, internationally recognized countries, parts of their administrations and governments, intel and security apparatus, multinational and transnational companies, and criminal clans and gangs. Sometimes Westerners or Zionists put someone to act as a president somewhere, like Zelensky in former Ukraine, Biden in the USA, Al-Jolani in Syria, Maya Sandu in Moldova, but actually there are always the same structures behind every political or terrorist puppet theater. The most powerful Western Zionist weapon is, if we mark them as the source of terrorism and atrocities worldwide, it is not their military, their intelligence or security apparatus, their infantry or air forces or special operation forces. Their most powerful weapon or tool today is media. It is a tool which prolongs the deception and manipulations, but holes are already made in Western media narratives, and many people throughout the world can see those holes, inconsistencies, and blatant lies in Western media reports, in their narratives, in conference for media by the Western politicians. So Western media try to stubbornly convince the world that the Western and Zionist organized crime group is actually international community in charge of world affairs. But we can see that only delusional Western politicians or Zionist politicians can still believe those lies and deceptions. And their mistakes are visible on a daily basis. And the great Chinese philosopher and military strategist Sun Tzu writes in The Art of War that if enemy makes mistakes, should not be interrupted. And multipolar world is not interrupting the enemy, which is making more and more mistakes, and multipolar world is letting enemy to make its mistakes because we have patience and they do not have much time. Thank you.
Thank you to Mrs. Bobana Angelkovic for her insightful speech. Now, I invite you all to turn your attention to the closing statement of the conference. Closing statement of the conference on terrorism, state and non-state sponsored versions. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed professors, intellectuals, and scientists who have joined this effort to uphold the rights of the oppressed and document the heinous crimes committed by anti-human terror groups like the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, MEK. Your contributions inspire hope for a world free of injustice and serve as a beacon to ensure such atrocities are never repeated. Freedom, justice, security, and peace are fundamental human rights. The denial of these rights, whether by extremist groups or complicit governments, constitutes a blatant violation of human rights and a form of terrorism. Today, terrorism is a shared global challenge that undermines human dignity and societal security. Addressing this issue requires collective action and the mobilization of all conscientious minds. The Terror Spring Institute affirms that freedom, justice, security, and peace are universal aspirations of all nations and governments. We call upon individuals, institutions, NGOs, and international organizations to prioritize these principles and take decisive action on both national and global levels to uphold and advance them. We believe that the state of global security and the actions of national, regional, and international actors have played a significant role in the formation and spread of terrorist cells. Tackling this issue demands a fundamental shift in our approach to terrorism, guided by the consensus of scholars, policymakers, and international legal bodies.